A conveyancer is actually an attorney that has a specialization after they have graduated and been admitted as an attorney, where they do a special field regarded as conveyancing, where they have the, let's call it the license or the education and the experience to attend to property-related transactions. Every conveyancer that is admitted in the High Court of South Africa is required to present themselves or register themselves with the Deeds Office. In South Africa, we have various deeds offices, particularly the deeds office that we work with here in the Western Cape is the Cape Town Deeds Office. Internationally, actually, our registration process is very well recognized and is regarded in the world as one of the most secure and safest methods of registration of transfer of ownership. The records in the deeds office are open to the public, and everybody who has an interest in a particular property or wants to know how the ownership is actually registered, the description of the property, the size of the property, is able to actually have access to the deeds office. Of course, if a client needs to contact us with any sort of information that they would require, we have the necessary expertise and knowledge to be able to give that information across to a client. You will be designated a transfer or bond secretary or a bond cancellation secretary, depending on the type of instruction that we are receiving. Once you have received a designated secretary, you will then know which professional you are working with and which secretary that will be working on your file. Before we are actually able to get to the deeds office and lodge the transaction at the deeds office in order to effect registration of transfer of ownership, there are significant things that are required to be done in our office to ensure that we are compliant with the obligations between the seller and the purchaser as recorded in the sale agreement, and also to obtain the various clearances and certificates and compliance certificates which are required in order for us to give registration of transfer of ownership. When we are dealing with a freehold property, for example, one of the requirements is that we need to demonstrate to the deeds office that as at the date of transfer, all the rates and the municipal charges have been paid up to date by the seller at the time of transfer. This is to ensure that when a purchaser takes transfer of the property, they are not taking transfer of the property saddled with any liability that the seller may have in respect of the property. So it is a requirement in terms of our conveyancing process for us to apply to the local authority. Should it be in the city of Cape Town, then it will be the Cape Town Municipality or the Cape Town Council, where we write to the Cape Town Council and obtain from them their requirements in order for us to pass transfer of the property. The rates clearance figures is what we refer to in the ordinary course, is what the city gives us as a requirement in order for us to collect from the seller and pay that money over to the city of Cape Town for them to issue a rates clearance certificate. Coupled with this is certain questions that some of our clients ask us when we receive instructions to attend to the transfer, and we contact them and we say to them, can you please provide us with what we call FICA, which is their personal information related to their identity, their proof of address, their tax number, their marital status. Sometimes clients get a little bit irritated with us and they say to us, but we have already provided this information to the estate agent that sold the property for us. Unfortunately, or fortunately for the purposes of getting proper governance, is that we are an accountable institution in terms of legislation in South Africa that is known as FICA. Coupled with this is that we are required, when we apply for the various clearances that we need in order to effect transfer of the property, for example to the City of Cape Town, is to provide to the City of Cape Town the contact details of the registered owner of the property, the current registered owner, which is the seller of the property, and the purchaser who is going to become the new registered owner of the property. This is to ensure that on the date of registration of transfer, the City of Cape Town is able to update their records and close the account in the name of the seller and create a new account in the name of the purchaser. Clients get frustrated because they say, why can't I sign my documentation electronically? So unfortunately or fortunately, at the moment in South Africa, there is a change where we are waiting for legislation to be amended or various court cases to be ultimately decided on the electronic signatures. In terms of the Alienation of Land Act, the sale agreement needs to be reduced to writing and signed by both parties. The legislation at the moment doesn't allow for an electronic signature. When it comes to the signature of the documentation that is needed for the deeds office. There is a power of attorney which the seller signs, which the seller authorizes the conveyancer to attend at the deeds office and pass transfer of the property. The current regulations in terms of the Deeds Office Act and regulations require that that signature by that seller on that power of attorney is actually an original signature in pen and doesn't make provision for an electronic digital signature. There have been significant strides and attempts to speed up our process so that we can get in line with what is currently happening in the world with digital signatures. On the bond side, the bank will generate a certain amount of documentation that is required to be signed. Depending on the type of bank that you're working with, some of those signatures will be required again in wet ink, which is why we need to see you in person. And aside from that, as being a representative on the bank's panel, the bank requires a conveyancer on their panel to explain the documentation to a purchaser so that he or she is very well aware of what their obligations are in terms of the repayment of the loan. The banks have made significant strides into wet ink signatures or pen signatures versus digital signatures, and some of the documentation that, and again bank dependent, some of the documentation that a client signs in respect of a bond will have an electronic signature or a signature that we obtain from the client digitally via a signing pad and a certificate that we have with the banks.